What if I told you that Beyoncé's own mother, yes, Tina Knowles, the woman who shaped the queen of pop's career and image, may have landed one of the most devastating blows Meghan Markle has ever received, and she did it without raising her voice, without insults, without theatrics. Just a few carefully chosen words, said on a podcast, that rippled across the world. And Meghan? She couldn't clap back. She couldn't rewrite the narrative. She couldn't spin it into a victory. Because the truth stung too deeply. Now pause for a moment. Imagine the irony. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, who built her post-royal career on podcasts, interviews, and carefully curated soundbites, gets humiliated on her own turf. Not by a journalist, not by a royal insider, but by a woman whose power and respect in the entertainment industry is so enormous that Meghan couldn't dare to confront her. Tina Knowles, mother of Beyoncé, spoke in June during a special episode of Meghan's own podcast, Confessions of a Female Founder. And what she said, while sounding like simple motherly advice, was a masterclass in subtle shade. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Tina explained how she and Beyoncé handle business disagreements. She admitted that yes, even mothers and daughters, even billion-dollar powerhouses, clash. But then came the kicker. She said she always apologizes. She always gives in. Because at the end of the day, family matters more than winning an argument. Think about that. Family over ego. Apologies over pride. Forgiveness over silence. Do you see where this is going? Meghan Markle, who hasn't spoken to her father Thomas Markle Sr. in years, who remains estranged from her siblings Samantha and Thomas Jr., who has fueled a global feud with her royal in-laws, sat across from Tina Knowles as those words landed. And the world couldn't help but notice the irony. Tina wasn't just speaking about Beyoncé. She was, intentionally or not, speaking directly to Meghan. But here's the real twist. Meghan smiled, nodded, pretended to engage. Yet everyone listening could sense the awkwardness. Tina's words hit like a sledgehammer against Meghan's carefully built wall of victimhood. For years, Meghan's narrative has been one of betrayal, cruelty, and toxic family members she simply had to cut off. But Tina's story shattered that framework. Because if Beyoncé, one of the most powerful women alive, can find humility to apologize to her own mother, then what excuse does Meghan really have? And this is why this story matters now more than ever. The estrangement between Meghan and her family hasn't faded with time. It's grown more tragic, more glaring. Thomas Markle Sr. is now 81 years old. He's publicly begged to see his grandchildren Archie and Lilibet. He's asked, over and over, for reconciliation. Each time, Meghan has responded with silence. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's rift with Prince William and Princess Kate only deepens. They left the royal family in 2020 promising to create space for healing. Yet every year since has brought more bitterness, more accusations, more distance. So when Tina Knowles made her comment, it wasn't just motherly wisdom. It was a mirror Meghan desperately wanted to avoid looking into. And millions of listeners realized it instantly. But let's dig even deeper. Why did this moment resonate so strongly with the public? Because it exposed a contradiction Meghan has worked so hard to hide. She brands herself as a champion of compassion, empathy, forgiveness, yet her personal life is a catalog of broken relationships and severed ties. Tina Knowles, with one gentle anecdote, highlighted the hypocrisy. It was as if she said, "If I can swallow my pride to keep my family together, why can't you?" Ask yourself, what must Meghan have been thinking in that moment? Did she feel exposed? Did she bristle inside, even as she forced a smile for the microphones? Or did she dismiss it, convinced the world wouldn't notice? Because if she thought people would miss it, she was wrong. Commentators pounced. Headlines wrote themselves. Social media lit up with laughter. People called it a soft clapback, a lesson Meghan refused to learn, a silent drag. And the cruelest irony? Meghan invited Tina onto the podcast herself. Imagine inviting someone into your own living room, giving them a platform, expecting flattery, and instead, they hand you a mirror showing your deepest flaw. That's what happened here. Meghan handed Tina the microphone, and Tina handed Meghan the truth. But here's where the story turns even darker. Meghan's critics didn't just stop at laughing about the awkwardness. They connected Tina's words to every single broken relationship in Meghan's life. with her father, with her siblings, with the royals, with former friends. The pattern became undeniable. Meghan doesn't reconcile. She burns bridges and never looks back. And when Tina casually said, "I always apologize," it highlighted what Meghan never does. The irony becomes painful. Meghan, who once claimed Kate made her cry before her wedding, never publicly apologized. Meghan, who accused the royal family of racism on international television, never apologized when William and Kate defended themselves. Meghan, who abandoned her father on his sickbed, never reached out even when he pleaded. Every wound remained open. Every feud remained raw. Every bridge remained torched. And now, Beyoncé's mother had thrown that reality into the spotlight. But here's the million-dollar question. Could Tina's words have been deliberate? Was this truly innocent advice? Or was it a carefully calculated statement? Because let's be honest, the Knowles family doesn't speak carelessly. They understand the weight of their words. They understand the spotlight. They understand power. So when Tina Knowles chose to emphasize apologies, forgiveness, and humility on Meghan Markle's own podcast, of all places, was she subtly calling Meghan out? Or was she, perhaps, offering her one last olive branch of wisdom? That's what makes this moment so powerful. Because either way, Meghan lost. If Tina meant it as innocent advice, Meghan looked exposed. If Tina meant it as shade, Meghan looked humiliated. There was no escape hatch, no media spin, no PR control. And that's why this story still echoes today. It wasn't just a podcast episode. It was a cultural collision. Meghan Markle, the self-styled victim, sitting across from Tina Knowles, the embodiment of resilience and maternal wisdom. One woman with a trail of broken bonds. Another with a daughter who remains fiercely loyal, successful, and untouchable. And the question hanging over it all, what happens when the world starts seeing Meghan not as a misunderstood princess, but as the woman Tina Knowles just schooled? Because what Tina said next didn't just land as advice. It landed as a brutal punchline Meghan couldn't escape. Picture this. Meghan Markle sitting in her podcast studio, wearing her carefully chosen outfit, her makeup flawless, her voice rehearsed into that blend of warmth and seriousness she's worked so hard to perfect. The microphones are set. The lighting is ideal. The mood is meant to scream prestige. She's hosting yet another special installment of her brand-building endeavor, a bonus episode of Confessions of a Female Founder. And her guest? None other than Tina Knowles, Beyoncé's mother, businesswoman, philanthropist, cultural icon. Now pause. Why Tina? Why Beyoncé's mom? That's the question that sets the stage for everything that followed. Meghan has long been desperate to carve herself into the Hollywood elite, to attach her name to global legends, and Beyoncé's family is as high as the ladder goes. Imagine the PR potential. Meghan Markle sits down with Beyoncé's mother. It's a headline tailor-made for glossy magazines, social media buzz, and global clickbait. Meghan thought she had struck gold. But this is where the story twists. Because the very thing Meghan thought would elevate her, rubbing shoulders with royalty of the music industry, became the very thing that exposed her. Tina Knowles didn't come with rehearsed flattery or scripted lines to boost Meghan's ego. She came with wisdom. Real, raw, uncomfortable wisdom. And that's where Meghan's careful plan unraveled. Let's walk through it step by step. Meghan introduces Tina, showering her with praise. She paints the picture. A woman who raised Beyoncé, who guided her career, who built empires alongside her daughter. Meghan highlights Tina's accomplishments as a designer, businesswoman, and mentor. You can almost hear Meghan's subtext. Look at us, two powerful women, two mothers, two leaders, sharing a platform. She wants the audience to see her reflected in Tina's glow. But here's the problem. No matter how much Meghan tried to frame the conversation, Tina brought her own energy and her own lessons. When she spoke about her relationship with Beyoncé, she was refreshingly candid. She admitted there were disagreements, that they didn't always see eye to eye, that mother and daughter sometimes clashed when it came to business and creativity. And then came the line that made headlines. She said that when they argued, she usually gave in. She apologized. She prioritized her family bond above her pride. Let that sink in. In Meghan's carefully controlled studio, Tina casually laid down a philosophy that directly contradicted Meghan's entire life strategy. Meghan's approach has been to cut people off, to sever ties, to burn bridges and move forward as if those people no longer exist. Tina's approach was humility, grace, reconciliation. So here's the mini hook. What did Meghan really think when Tina said those words? Did her stomach drop? Did her heart pound? Or did she simply smile? While inside, she realized millions of listeners were going to connect Tina's advice to her failures. And the failures are many. Let's list them out the way Meghan's critics do. Meghan hasn't spoken to her father in years, despite his repeated pleas to reconnect. She's estranged from her half-sister Samantha and half-brother Thomas Jr. She left her extended family out of her royal wedding. She's kept her children away from their grandfather, despite his ill health and advancing age. On top of that, her fallout with the royal family, with William, Kate, and even Charles, has only worsened with time. To put it bluntly, Meghan doesn't reconcile. She severs. And now, sitting across from her, was a woman saying reconciliation is the only way forward. Let's dig into the optics of this moment. Meghan invited Tina because she wanted Beyoncé's aura of greatness to rub off on her. She wanted the Bayhive, the loyal fandom that worships Beyoncé, to see Meghan as a sister figure, a woman worthy of the same reverence. But instead, Meghan found herself being schooled in humility. Tina didn't need to insult her. She didn't need to point fingers. She just told the truth about her own life. And in doing so, she accidentally shone a spotlight on Meghan's failures. Now here's where the story gets deliciously ironic. Meghan has often positioned herself as a victim of toxic family dynamics. She's claimed her father betrayed her. She's dismissed her siblings as opportunists. She's painted the royal family as cruel and oppressive. And yet, Tina's words implied something radical. Maybe the problem isn't just everyone else. Maybe the problem is Meghan's inability to apologize. Think about how Tina framed it. She didn't say Beyoncé always gives in. She didn't say disagreements magically disappear. She said she, the mother, the mentor, the elder, takes the initiative. She swallows her pride. She apologizes. Why? Because preserving the relationship is more important than proving she's right. That's wisdom earned through decades of parenting and partnership. And that's the wisdom Meghan has rejected over and over. Ask yourself, what must Harry have thought, sitting in the background, listening to Tina? Did he feel the sting too? Did he wonder whether this was advice not just for Meghan, but for him? After all, his own relationship with William has collapsed under the weight of pride and accusations. His father Charles is aging, his time limited, yet Harry has chosen estrangement over forgiveness. Did Tina's words echo in his ears too, reminding him of everything he's lost? This is where the power of the moment lies. Tina wasn't just speaking to Meghan. She was speaking to anyone who's ever been caught in a feud, who's ever chosen ego over family, who's ever let pride destroy a bond. That universality made her words resonate far beyond the podcast. But for Meghan, the universality turned into a spotlight, because her life is the textbook case of ignoring such advice. And the world noticed. Commentators couldn't resist pointing out the irony. Social media lit up with memes and laughter. Headlines framed it as a subtle dig. Royal watchers called it a soft but devastating blow. And Meghan, who wanted to align herself with Tina's power, instead became the punchline. Let's not forget, Tina Knowles is no ordinary guest. She's a woman whose influence in American culture is immense. She shaped Beyoncé's brand. She protected her daughter from exploitation. She navigated fame and family with grace. When she speaks, people listen. And Meghan, who thrives on carefully controlling narratives, had no control here. That's why this chapter is so crucial. This wasn't just another podcast episode. It was the perfect setup for everything that followed. A stage Meghan thought she owned became the very stage where she was exposed. And here's the cliffhanger. Meghan wasn't prepared for Tina's next sentence, a line dripping with irony. Because if apologizing is what keeps Beyoncé's family united, what does Meghan's refusal to apologize say about the future of hers? What makes advice sting the most? When it's disguised as kindness. When it slips in softly, like a breeze through the room, but lands like a storm in the heart of the person hearing it. That's exactly what happened when Tina Knowles, Beyoncé's mother, sat across from Meghan Markle and started talking about family disputes. She didn't point a finger. She didn't use Meghan's name. She didn't criticize or accuse. Instead, she spoke from her own life, her own experience. And that's why it hit so hard. Because Tina wasn't gossiping. She wasn't dragging Meghan on purpose. She was simply telling the truth about how she manages disagreements with Beyoncé. And what did she say? She admitted that sometimes she and Beyoncé clash. Sometimes they disagree about business. Sometimes emotions get heated. But, and here's the part that sent shockwaves through the audience. Tina revealed that she always apologizes, that she always gives in, that at the end of the day, her relationship with her daughter is more valuable than any single argument. Now let's pause. What does that sound like to you? A simple parenting philosophy, or a mirror being held up to Meghan Markle's life? Because when Tina spoke those words, everyone listening couldn't help but make the connection. Meghan, who hasn't spoken to her father in years. Meghan, who cut ties with her half-sister and half-brother. Meghan, who escalated feuds with the royals instead of mending them. Sitting in her own podcast studio, being handed the one piece of advice she's ignored at every turn: apologize. Can you imagine the discomfort? Meghan smiling politely, nodding as if she's listening intently, while inside her thoughts must have been racing. Did Tina just expose her? Did Tina realize the double meaning? Was this advice meant for the audience? Or was it meant for Meghan personally? And let's be honest, Tina Knowles isn't naive. This is a woman who's navigated fame, family, betrayal, and business at the very highest level. She knows how words travel. She knows how interviews work. She knows that any comment she makes, especially about family, will be dissected, analyzed, spun. So the idea that she just accidentally gave Meghan the advice she needed most? That's hard to believe. But here's the irony. Tina framed it as humility, as love. She wasn't boasting about control or power. She wasn't claiming to win every argument. Quite the opposite. She admitted she loses them. She chooses to lose them. Because to her, maintaining unity matters more than being right. And this is where Meghan's life philosophy crashes headfirst into Tina's. Think about Meghan's history. Instead of apologizing to her father when he staged paparazzi photos before her wedding, she cut him off. Instead of apologizing to Kate for their pre-wedding argument, she doubled down and aired the feud to Oprah. Instead of finding compromise with the royals after leaving in 2020, she escalated the drama with accusations of racism and cruelty. At every turn, Meghan has chosen pride over peace, distance over reconciliation, division over unity. And here comes Tina Knowles, calmly explaining that her method is the opposite. Pride doesn't preserve family, it poisons it. Ego doesn't sustain bonds, it severs them. Apologies, even when you don't think you're wrong, are what keep families whole. Ask yourself this. How many broken bridges in Meghan's life could have been repaired with one apology? One letter to her father, one phone call to her sister, one olive branch to William. Would history have unfolded differently if Meghan had followed Tina's philosophy? But Meghan didn't. She doesn't. And perhaps she never will. That's what makes this moment so devastating. Because Tina's advice wasn't abstract. It was a direct contradiction of Meghan's entire approach to family. It showed the world the path Meghan refuses to walk. And it wasn't just about Thomas Markle or Kate Middleton. Think of the children, Archie and Lilibet. They're growing up with almost no extended family in their lives. No grandfather on Meghan's side. No aunts or uncles from her siblings. No cousins from the royal side. The apology gap isn't just Meghan's personal burden, it's her children's inheritance. Now let's add another layer, the audience. Millions of listeners heard Tina's words, and they laughed, they tweeted, they commented. Many of them wrote the same thing. Was Tina talking about Meghan? Some even joked that Tina had just dropped the most polite drag in history. That's how the internet works. Even if Tina never intended it as shade, the audience interpreted it as shade. And once that narrative catches fire, there's no stopping it. Meghan can't control it. She can't silence it. She can't reframe it. And that's where the humiliation sets in. Meghan invited Tina to boost her credibility, but instead, Tina boosted the narrative that Meghan refuses to reconcile, that Meghan refuses to apologize, that Meghan is the opposite of Beyoncé's family values. Let's be brutally honest. Beyoncé is untouchable. Her brand is flawless. Her image is bulletproof. She's admired, adored, respected. And much of that comes from the strong family foundation Tina built around her. Meghan, on the other hand, has a brand tainted by feuds, lawsuits, bitterness. So when Tina explained how she and Beyoncé stay united despite disagreements, it wasn't just advice. It was a comparison, an unspoken, "This is how we succeed, and this is why you fail." And Meghan knew it. This wasn't a rant. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was a chess move. Ted Sarandos, the man who built Netflix into the most powerful streaming empire in the world, doesn't just speak, he signals. And when he allegedly said, "They lied to us, we were misled," it wasn't an outburst. It was strategy. Hollywood insiders immediately understood Sarandos was sending a message, not just to Meghan and Harry, not just to his staff, but to Wall Street, to Hollywood, and to every future celebrity who thought they could use Netflix as a mouthpiece. His words were a line in the sand. A warning: Netflix is not a stage for unchecked propaganda. Why now? Timing is everything. By the time whispers of Sarandos' frustration surfaced, Netflix was under pressure. Subscriber growth had slowed. Investors wanted confidence, not controversy. Awards season loomed, and credibility mattered more than clicks. If Netflix looked complicit in exaggeration, it risked more than embarrassment. It risked losing the very prestige that justifies billion-dollar budgets. And let's not forget, Sarandos has played this game before. He's navigated scandals, backlash, even political storms. He knows how to use silence as armor, and when to break it like a blade. So when he broke it here, it was calculated. He wasn't just distancing Netflix from Meghan and Harry. He was repositioning Netflix itself as the victim. "They lied to us. We were misled." With those words, Sarandos shifted the blame, deflecting criticism from his company and placing it squarely on the Sussexes' shoulders. Think about the brilliance of that. For months, critics had accused Netflix of pushing a one-sided narrative. Now, with a single phrase, Sarandos reframed the story. Netflix wasn't the manipulator, it was the manipulated. Suddenly, the Sussexes weren't the victims. They were the suspects. But here's the twist. Sarandos didn't shout it from a stage. He didn't issue a press release. He let it leak. He let Hollywood gossip mills carry the quote, whisper it across boardrooms, repeat it at cocktail parties. That's how power works here. Plausible deniability on the surface, devastating impact underneath. Everyone heard the words. No one could quite pin them down. And the damage spread faster than any official statement ever could. Do you see the genius here? By saying so little, he said everything. And Meghan and Harry? They had no playbook for this. They built their brand on being louder, more emotional, more dramatic than the institutions they fought against. But how do you fight someone who doesn't shout, who doesn't posture, who simply drops a quiet phrase that flips the narrative on its head? Here's another layer to consider: investors. By signaling Netflix was misled, Sarandos reassured Wall Street that the company wasn't complicit, that any damage to credibility wasn't systemic, but external. It was the Sussexes' fault, not Netflix's. In a single stroke, he defended the brand and isolated the problem. And for Meghan and Harry, that isolation was deadly. Hollywood runs on relationships, and Sarandos' words made them radioactive. If Netflix, the company that gave them their biggest stage, felt deceived, who else in Hollywood would take the risk? Agents heard the message. Studios heard the message. Even potential allies understood. Sarandos had spoken, and the Sussexes' stock was falling fast. So here's the cliffhanger. Sarandos didn't just vent frustration. He executed a move that redefined the entire playing field. And while Meghan and Harry scrambled to control the fallout, Hollywood insiders were already asking a brutal question. Was this the moment Netflix quietly began cutting the Sussexes loose? What came next would answer that, and it would be devastating. The Sussexes had always controlled their narrative. From Oprah's interview to magazine spreads, from podcasts to their Netflix series, Meghan and Harry set the terms. They decided what to reveal, when to reveal it, and how it would be framed. But when Ted Sarandos broke his silence, even in whispers, that power slipped through their fingers. Suddenly, they weren't leading the story. They were reacting to it. And for a couple who built their empire on narrative control, that was catastrophic. In Hollywood, timing is everything. The reports of Sarandos' comments didn't explode with a dramatic press conference. They leaked. Quietly, strategically, devastatingly. A phrase like, "They lied to us, we were misled," doesn't need to be shouted to cause damage. It seeps. It spreads. And once it's out there, silence becomes louder than any response. So what did Meghan and Harry do? That's the question that has haunted insiders. Publicly, they remained quiet. Archwell, their organization, issued no fiery denials. Meghan didn't stage a glamorous interview to counter the narrative. Harry didn't release an angry statement. Instead, there was nothing. And in Hollywood, nothing often means panic. Behind closed doors, insiders whisper that Meghan's PR advisors debated furiously. Should they counterattack, claiming Netflix was scapegoating them? Should they double down on their truth brand? Or would silence buy them time? But every day they hesitated, the gossip spread. Hollywood doesn't like uncertainty. If you don't control your story, the town writes it for you. Here's the irony. The couple who once accused the monarchy of briefing against them now faced the same suspicion in Los Angeles. Was Netflix briefing against them? Were they being positioned as the villains to protect the brand? The parallels were striking, and for Meghan especially, the sting must have been brutal. She had traded one palace for another, Buckingham for Hollywood, only to find herself cornered again. And what about Harry? Friends suggest he was caught in a bind. He had tied his name, his reputation, and his new life to Meghan's Hollywood ambitions. But Netflix wasn't just Meghan's project, it was his too. To see their credibility questioned by the very platform they relied on left him conflicted. Some say Harry wanted to fight back. Others say he preferred to stay quiet, hoping the storm would pass. But storms don't pass in Hollywood. They intensify. The longer Meghan and Harry said nothing, the more their silence was interpreted as guilt. If it isn't true, industry insiders asked, why not deny it? That question spread like wildfire, from gossip columns to investor calls. Archwell tried to pivot, focusing on other projects. But here's the problem. When your flagship partnership is crumbling, everything else feels smaller. Their podcast deal had already fizzled. Their scripted projects hadn't materialized. The Netflix fallout loomed larger than anything they could announce. And without a counterpunch, the couple looked weak. So here's where it gets truly dangerous for them. Hollywood loyalty is transactional. Allies stick around when you're bankable. But when you look like a liability, even friends fade away. Slowly, invitations dried up. Public appearances grew fewer. Meghan and Harry, who once commanded endless headlines, found themselves increasingly sidelined. Do you see the pattern? They left the monarchy claiming they were silenced. They entered Hollywood claiming they'd found freedom. And now, their silence spoke louder than anything they could say. And here's the cliffhanger. As the couple scrambled to figure out their next move, whispers began circulating that this wasn't just about Netflix. Other companies, other partners, were watching closely. And what they saw made them nervous. Hollywood doors don't slam shut all at once. They creak, they close slowly, until suddenly you realize you're outside. And for Meghan and Harry, that moment may have already begun. It's bigger than Meghan, bigger than Harry, bigger even than Netflix. At the heart of this storm lies a question that shakes the entire streaming industry. Can audiences still trust what they're watching? Think about it. Documentaries have always walked a fine line. They're part journalism, part entertainment. But in recent years, the genre has exploded. Platforms like Netflix sell themselves not just as entertainers, but as truth-tellers. The brand depends on it. And when that trust is shaken, the consequences ripple far beyond one royal couple. The Sussexes documentary was supposed to be Netflix's proof of concept, authentic, raw, historic. Instead, critics accused it of being polished propaganda. The paparazzi footage that didn't match, the anecdotes that didn't add up, the lack of verification for some of the most explosive claims, each one chipped away at credibility. And if Netflix could be misled here, what about all their other so-called documentaries? That's what terrified executives. If one show can make the whole platform look unreliable, then trust in the entire brand begins to erode. And Sarandos knew it. His alleged words weren't just aimed at Harry and Meghan. They were aimed at protecting Netflix itself. They lied to us wasn't just anger. It was insulation. It was him drawing a line and saying, blame them, not us. And audiences were listening. Forums filled with skepticism. Commentators warned that streaming had blurred the line between truth and drama. Some even asked if the Sussex documentary should be reclassified as reality TV instead of documentary. Imagine the humiliation for Netflix. Their royal blockbuster downgraded to the same category as a dating show. But here's where it cuts deeper. Competitors smelled blood. Rivals at Amazon, Hulu, Disney, they all know perception is power. And if Netflix looked like it had been duped, That perception opened the door for others to claim their documentaries were more trustworthy. In a business built on subscribers, that's lethal. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's brand took collateral damage. They sold themselves as truth-tellers, survivors breaking free from oppression. But if the platform that gave them their loudest megaphone questions that truth, the entire foundation of Archewell begins to wobble. Because let's be honest, their power doesn't come from talent in acting or filmmaking. It comes from their story. And if the story is in doubt, so is everything else. Here's the contradiction. Meghan and Harry thought Hollywood would free them from the monarchy's control. But Hollywood runs on its own rules, and credibility is king. Once you lose it, you're done. And Sarandos knew it wasn't just about optics. It was about business. Netflix's value is built on being trusted to deliver real stories, even when dramatized. If subscribers start doubting that, they cancel. Investors panic. The stock dips. That's why Sarandos spoke. He wasn't just expressing frustration. He was defending the entire house of cards. Now pause. Ask yourself this. Can streaming giants ever truly tell the truth when celebrities control the narrative? Or are we all being sold polished fiction disguised as fact? That's the cliffhanger. Because Netflix may have protected its brand for now, but Meghan and Harry? Their empire was built on the fragile promise of authenticity. And as Netflix tightened its grip, the couple found themselves standing on shakier ground than ever before, with their entire Hollywood future hanging in the balance. Follow the money. Because in Hollywood, it always tells the truth. Strip away the glitz, the headlines, the emotional monologues, and what remains is a balance sheet. And when it came to Meghan and Harry's deal with Netflix, those numbers started raising alarms. On paper, the Sussexes' partnership looked like a triumph. Harry and Meghan generated massive viewership. Netflix bragged about record-breaking numbers in its press releases. But here's the uncomfortable truth executives wrestled with. High viewership doesn't always equal high return. Subscribers who joined to watch the Sussexes didn't always stick around. And the wave of controversy that followed? That didn't translate into prestige. It translated into risk. Consider the breakdown. The Sussexes signed a deal reportedly worth up to $100 million. For that, Netflix expected a slate of projects, documentaries, scripted shows, children's programming. Grand promises. But what actually materialized? One major docuseries, Harry's Heart of Invictus, and scattered announcements that fizzled. Where was the big-budget children's show Meghan once teased? Where were the original films, the scripted dramas, the long-term hits? The output didn't match the investment. And Hollywood is merciless with math. If you spend $100 million, you expect 10 times that in cultural impact, subscribers gained, and prestige secured. Instead, Netflix found itself defending the integrity of a single documentary while other projects sputtered. That's not ROI. That's embarrassment disguised as entertainment. Ask yourself, if you were Netflix, would you renew that deal? Would you pour millions more into a brand that sparked backlash, damaged credibility, and delivered less content than promised? Behind closed doors, those very questions were asked. Financial analysts quietly raised eyebrows. Shareholders weren't convinced the Sussex deal had been worth it. Even industry insiders began using a phrase dreaded in Hollywood: bad investment. And when that phrase attaches itself to a star, or in this case, a royal couple, the fallout is brutal. It wasn't just about money lost. It was about money scared away. Advertisers started hesitating. Sponsors looked at the Sussexes and saw risk. Even charities became cautious, worried about aligning too closely with a brand accused of stretching the truth. Financial consequences ripple. One lost deal leads to another. One whisper of toxic becomes a chorus. And here's where it gets devastating. Without Netflix's unwavering backing, what's left of Meghan and Harry's Hollywood dream? Spotify had already cut ties, bluntly ending their deal after one underperforming podcast. Other platforms weren't knocking down the door. Without Netflix, the Sussexes would be forced to rely on smaller deals, speaking engagements, or book contracts, none of which carried the same global impact or prestige. The numbers didn't just weaken the Sussexes' Hollywood standing. They humiliated them. Imagine signing the biggest royal streaming deal in history, only to have the world ask, was it worth it? Did Netflix get played? Did Meghan and Harry cash in on their royal names and leave Netflix holding the bill? So here's the cliffhanger. As the financial reality set in, Netflix executives began preparing for the inevitable. And Meghan and Harry were about to learn the coldest truth of all. In Hollywood, loyalty lasts only as long as the money flows. What came next would prove that allies bought with cash can vanish overnight. Those who once toasted Meghan and Harry's freedom with champagne flutes were now whispering doubts in dimly lit corners of Beverly Hills. The same celebrities and media allies who had hailed the couple as cultural icons began to rethink their loyalties. In Hollywood, where reputations rise and fall faster than box office weekends, the Sussexes suddenly looked less like revolutionary truth-tellers and more like liabilities. At the beginning, it was intoxicating. Oprah gave them the biggest stage on earth. Tyler Perry offered his mansion as sanctuary. Serena Williams, Beyoncé, and a string of A-list friends lined up to show support. Meghan and Harry weren't just royals anymore. They were Hollywood's newest darlings. But alliances in this industry are transactional. And when Netflix, the Sussexes' most powerful backer, started signaling dissatisfaction, those alliances began to fracture. Imagine the quiet conversations. A producer once eager to pitch a Sussex project now saying, "Maybe we wait." An agent whispering to a client, "Aligning with them might not help your brand right now." Even celebrities who once praised Meghan's courage began to go silent, wary of being tied to a couple accused of exaggeration. Hollywood thrives on momentum, and the Sussexes' momentum was slipping. The betrayal stung. Meghan, who had positioned herself as the industry insider, the American actress who married into royalty and brought the palace to Hollywood's doorstep, now found herself facing the same whispers she had once lobbed at Buckingham Palace. Manipulative, controlling, unreliable. Those words don't just damage a reputation. They destroy trust. And here's the cruel irony. The Sussexes had built their power on relationships. They didn't have a Marvel franchise. They didn't have a catalog of best-selling films. They had friends, networks, and public sympathy. But when those friends sensed risk, they did what Hollywood always does. They protected themselves. Slowly, allies turned into critics. Take the media, for example. Outlets that once ran glowing profiles now ran skeptical headlines. The British press had always been critical, but now even U.S. outlets began to question the Sussex narrative. A dangerous shift. Because once American media cools, the Hollywood ecosystem follows. And let's not forget the whispers from within. Some who worked on the Netflix project reportedly described clashes with Meghan and Harry behind the scenes. Creative control became a battlefield. Producers felt managed rather than collaborative. One insider allegedly quipped, "It felt less like making a documentary and more like staging a campaign video." If that's what allies thought privately, imagine what skeptics were ready to say publicly. Now pause. Do you see the cycle here? The couple who fled the monarchy claiming betrayal were now facing betrayal themselves. The Sussexes accused the palace of briefing against them. Now Hollywood whispered against them. They claimed the royals left them isolated. Now Hollywood's elites were doing the same. History, repeating itself in brutal irony. And what about Sarandos? His alleged comments gave permission for others to speak. If Netflix's boss could question the Sussexes, why couldn't everyone else? The floodgates opened. Gossip turned to criticism. Once whispered doubts became public. That's the cliffhanger. Because as allies slipped away, Meghan and Harry's circle grew smaller. And in Hollywood, isolation is the death knell of relevance. The couple who once seemed untouchable were suddenly vulnerable. And the question hung in the air. If even their friends were stepping back, who would still stand with them when the storm got worse? Every empire falls. The only question is, how fast? For Meghan and Harry, the cracks in their Hollywood kingdom were beginning to look like fault lines, and Sarandos' words were the tremor that threatened to bring the whole structure down. Without Netflix's unconditional support, their entire future in the industry was up for grabs. Think about it. What's left for them if the streaming giant that made their biggest splash now feels deceived? Spotify had already slammed the door shut, pulling the plug on their multi-million-dollar podcast deal after one disappointing season. Archwell Audio was supposed to rival the biggest names in podcasting, but instead, it fizzled into silence. That was strike one. Netflix wobbling? That's strike two. And in Hollywood, you don't often get a third chance. So what does the future look like for the Sussexes? Let's break it down. Their core selling point, their royal status, is a double-edged sword. It gave them global attention, yes, but it also tethered them to palace drama they can't escape. Every project they pitch comes back to one thing: their ties to the monarchy. But how many times can you tell the same story before people stop listening? The royal card can only be played so many times, and Hollywood knows it. But here's the kicker: Meghan couldn't challenge Tina. Not on air. Not off air. Tina Knowles isn't a tabloid journalist or a bitter royal insider. She's Beyoncé's mom. To confront her would be social suicide in Hollywood. To argue with her would be unthinkable. So Meghan smiled, nodded, pretended to take it in stride. But the audience saw through it. The audience saw the stiffness in her expression, the awkwardness in her body language. The audience knew the advice had landed where it wasn't welcome. And this is where the story sharpens into irony. Meghan has built her post-royal identity around telling her truth, around controlling narratives, around shaping every conversation to her advantage. But Tina's truth slipped past Meghan's defenses. It wasn't Meghan's story anymore. It was Tina's story, and Meghan was trapped inside it. That's why commentators like Sarah Hewson immediately picked up on the significance. On the Sun's royal exclusive show, Hewson framed it perfectly. Tina was offering valuable advice about managing family feuds. And everyone knew exactly which feud she meant. The Markles, the Windsors, the endless trail of estrangements Meghan leaves behind her. So what happened next? Tina's words didn't fade into the background. They echoed. They grew louder with every retelling. And they became a symbol of everything Meghan refuses to face. Because here's the cliffhanger. When Tina emphasized apologizing, the silence from Meghan said everything. And that silence would only grow louder as the world connected Tina's advice to every single broken tie in Meghan's life. What is the hardest word in the English language? For Meghan Markle, it isn't some 10-syllable tongue twister. It isn't an academic term or a foreign phrase. It's the simplest, shortest word of them all: sorry. Tina Knowles didn't just hand Meghan advice. She highlighted Meghan's Achilles heel. She showed the world what Meghan has never done: apologize. And that single truth, laid bare on Meghan's own podcast, reverberates through every part of her fractured personal life. Let's start at the beginning. Meghan Markle rose to fame on the idea of being wronged. She's the outsider, the misunderstood woman who entered the royal family and found herself crushed by its coldness. She told the world her father betrayed her. She told Oprah that Kate made her cry. She told millions that palace insiders plotted against her. Every story positions Meghan as the victim. And what do victims never do? They never say sorry. Now compare that to Tina's philosophy. She admitted that even when she doesn't think she's wrong, she apologizes. She gives in, not because she lost, but because she values the relationship more than the argument. That humility is what sustains Beyoncé's empire, what preserves her family bond, what allows mother and daughter to thrive together despite the pressure of global fame. And this is where Meghan's story cracks wide open. Because if humility sustains legacies, pride destroys them. And Meghan's refusal to apologize is the thread that unravels every relationship she's ever had. Think about Thomas Markle Sr. The man walked his daughter down the path of life, if not down the aisle. He paid for her education, bragged about her success, cheered for her every milestone. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, the staged paparazzi photos before the royal wedding were embarrassing. But imagine if Meghan had picked up the phone and said one simple word: sorry. Sorry for the chaos. Sorry for the pressure. Sorry for the distance. One apology could have opened the door to reconciliation. Instead, Meghan slammed it shut. Now Thomas Markle is 81 years old. He's begged, on television and in interviews, to see his grandchildren Archie and Lilibet. He's pleaded for a chance to reconnect. And Meghan? Silence. Cold, brutal silence. The absence of apology has hardened into estrangement. And every year, the window of opportunity grows smaller. Then there's Samantha Markle. Meghan's half-sister has been one of her fiercest critics, calling her manipulative, selfish, and deceitful. Meghan could have taken the high road. She could have offered a quiet olive branch, a behind-the-scenes apology, even if only for the cameras. Instead, she's ignored her entirely, until Samantha's lawsuits and interviews forced Meghan's hand. Even then, Meghan framed herself as the victim, the misunderstood duchess. Still no apology. Still no humility. And what about the royals? The infamous bridesmaid dress fight with Kate Middleton is the perfect example. In Meghan's version of the story, it was Kate who made her cry before the wedding. In other reports, Meghan reduced Kate to tears. But what was missing on both sides? A genuine apology. Kate reportedly extended peace gestures. Meghan? She weaponized the story years later in an interview watched by millions, ensuring the wound would never heal. One sorry could have rewritten history. Instead, it cemented the rift. Then came Prince William. For Harry, William wasn't just a brother. He was a second father figure after Diana's death. Their bond was legendary, unshakable, until Meghan entered the picture. When William raised concerns about Meghan early on, Harry took it as betrayal. Meghan fueled the divide, whispering that William and Kate didn't accept her. Did Harry or Meghan ever apologize for the hurtful things said? For the accusations of racism aired on global television? For the Netflix series that painted William as cold and cruel? Not once. Silence again. And let's not forget King Charles. The man walked Meghan down the aisle when her father couldn't. He gave her one of the grandest weddings in modern history. He offered her a place in his family. And what did Meghan give in return? Criticism, accusations, distance. After the Queen's death, when Charles extended his hand with a royal walkabout, Meghan played along. But an apology? Never. Do you see the pattern? Over and over, Meghan has chosen not to apologize, not to reconcile, not to bend. Pride has become her shield. But pride also isolates. Pride also alienates. Pride leaves her with fewer allies, fewer friends, fewer bridges left standing. Now here's the cruel twist. Meghan brands herself as a humanitarian, a feminist, a champion of compassion and empathy. She tells audiences she believes in forgiveness, in kindness, in healing. Yet her own life contradicts every word. The people closest to her, her father, her siblings, her in-laws, remain estranged. And all because of a missing word, sorry. Imagine if Meghan followed Tina's advice. Imagine if she apologized to Thomas Markle. Imagine the photos of him meeting Archie and Lilibet. Imagine the headlines of reconciliation. Imagine the global applause for humility. Meghan's image would transform overnight. She'd go from villain to hero, from heartless to healing, from divider to uniters. One apology could change everything. But Meghan doesn't apologize. And the longer she waits, the less powerful an apology becomes. What once could have been seen as humility will one day look like desperation. What once could have been grace will later look like damage control. Time robs apologies of their power. This is why Tina Knowles' words stung so deeply. Because she didn't just highlight Meghan's refusal. She exposed the consequences. Beyoncé's empire thrives because Tina prioritizes relationships over pride. Meghan's world crumbles because she prioritizes pride over relationships. One woman apologizes. The other refuses. One builds bridges. The other burns them. Ask yourself, which legacy will endure? Which story will inspire? Which example will Archie and Lilibet grow up with? Will they learn from their grandmother Doria and great-grandmother Tina that family survives through humility? Or will they learn from Meghan that family ties can be severed without remorse? Here's the deeper irony. Meghan desperately wants what Beyoncé has: cultural reverence, lasting power, universal respect. But she refuses to embrace the very values that made Beyoncé untouchable. Instead of humility, she chooses arrogance. Instead of apology, she chooses silence. Instead of reconciliation, she chooses exile. And that's why Tina's advice wasn't just a suggestion. It was a dagger wrapped in velvet. It showed the world the stark contrast between two women. One who built an empire through humility, and one who risks losing everything through pride. Because when Tina emphasized apologizing, Meghan's silence screamed louder than words. And in that silence, the world saw the truth Meghan never wanted to admit. But Meghan wasn't the only one Tina's advice seemed aimed at. Harry's face tells its own story. What happens when the truth is spoken in a room and one person desperately wants to ignore it, but another can't hide the look on his face? That was the moment Meghan Markle's podcast with Tina Knowles shifted from uncomfortable to unforgettable. Because while Meghan smiled, nodded, and pretended to take Tina's words in stride, Prince Harry sat quietly, and his silence spoke volumes. Harry wasn't just a bystander that day. He was the silent witness to a conversation that could have changed his life, if he was willing to hear it. And the cruel irony is that Tina Knowles' words didn't only apply to Meghan. They applied to him just as much. Perhaps even more. Let's rewind. Tina had just said that when she and Beyoncé disagree, she gives in. She apologizes. She always chooses reconciliation over pride. Simple words, right? But in Harry's world, those words hit like thunder. Because Harry's life right now is defined by broken ties. Ties he himself once cherished above all else. Think about his relationship with Prince William. For decades, the brothers were inseparable. They were the firm within the firm. The boys who survived Diana's death together, who grew up under the same spotlight, who leaned on each other when the world became unbearable. Harry once called William the only person I can really trust. That bond was supposed to be unbreakable. And yet, here we are. William and Harry haven't spoken properly in years. Their relationship is reduced to cold public appearances, stiff body language, and leaked accounts of bitter arguments. William feels betrayed by Harry's accusations. Harry feels abandoned by William's loyalty to the crown. The feud has hardened to the point that reconciliation feels impossible. Now picture Harry sitting in that podcast studio, hearing Tina Knowles casually say that no argument is worth destroying a bond with family. That she always apologizes, even when she doesn't think she's wrong. Could Harry have missed the parallel? Could he have failed to connect Tina's wisdom to his own feud with William? Not likely. And what about his father? King Charles may not have been the warmest parent, but he has always longed for unity. At the Queen's funeral, Charles extended an olive branch. At his coronation, he made sure Harry had a seat, even if it was at the edges of the spectacle. Charles has publicly expressed his love for both his sons. But Harry, emboldened by Meghan's influence, has poured gasoline on the rift. He's accused Charles of neglect, of cruelty, of favoring William. He's mocked him in interviews, humiliated him in his memoir Spare. And still, Charles has left the door open. Still, he hasn't completely shut his son out. Still, he hopes for reconciliation. But reconciliation requires humility. It requires an apology. It requires someone to give in. And Harry has refused. So when Tina Knowles said she always apologizes, it wasn't just a parenting anecdote. It was a roadmap Harry could have followed. A roadmap back to William. A roadmap back to Charles. A roadmap to the family unity he secretly craves. Because make no mistake, Harry craves it. Behind the bravado, behind the bitterness, behind the public complaints, Harry has shown flashes of longing. He spoke in interviews about missing William. He admitted in Spare that he sometimes dreams of reconciliation. He has expressed sadness that his children don't know their royal cousins. These aren't the words of a man who wants permanent exile. These are the words of a man torn in two, loyalty to his wife on one side, longing for his family on the other. And that's why Tina's advice hit Harry differently than it hit Meghan. Meghan could ignore it. Meghan could laugh it off. Meghan could tell herself it didn't apply to her. But Harry? He couldn't. His entire body language gave him away. The stiffness in his shoulders. The downward glance. The silence that lingered a beat too long. It was the look of a man hearing truth he didn't want to face. Ask yourself this. Has Harry ever been given advice like that before? From Meghan, he hears only validation. From Oprah, he heard encouragement to speak his truth. From Netflix executives, he heard dollar signs. But from Tina Knowles, he heard wisdom, humility, a philosophy that could heal his life if only he could summon the courage to follow it. The irony is staggering. Harry has spent years talking about therapy, about mental health, about healing. And yet the simplest healing act of all, saying sorry, has eluded him. Imagine the headlines if Harry apologized to William. Imagine the photos of the brothers embracing again. Imagine the global sigh of relief if the monarchy's most famous feud ended with humility instead of bitterness. It would rewrite Harry's legacy overnight. But here's the problem. Harry is trapped. Trapped by pride. Trapped by Meghan's influence. Trapped by the brand they've built together. A brand that depends on grievance, on victimhood, on estrangement. To apologize would be to dismantle the very foundation of their narrative. And Meghan, who has mastered the art of never apologizing, will never encourage him to take that step. So Harry sat in silence. A silence loaded with meaning. A silence that screamed louder than any words. Because here's the contradiction. Harry wants reconciliation, but he won't take the first step. He wants love from his brother, but he won't lower his guard. He wants respect from his father, but he won't humble himself. And as Tina spoke, the reality of that contradiction must have pressed down on him. The cruel twist? Time is running out. William grows colder with every passing year. Charles grows older. Thomas Markle is nearing the end of his life. Reconciliation windows are closing, one by one. And Harry knows it. That's why Tina's words must have echoed in his head long after the microphones turned off. But here's the cliffhanger. Because what Harry craves most, Meghan may never allow him to have. What's more dangerous for Meghan Markle than Tina Knowles' words? It's when those words don't just vanish after the podcast, but are picked up, magnified, and dissected by the royal commentary machine. Because once royal commentators get their teeth into a story, they don't let go. And this was no exception. Tina's gentle admission about apologizing was like blood in the water, and the media piranhas circled immediately. Let's start with Sarah Hewson. On the Sun's royal exclusive show, she cut through the fluff and nailed the core of what Tina had really said. Hewson didn't mince her words. Tina's comments weren't just anecdotes about raising Beyoncé. They were advice. And advice, when delivered on Meghan Markle's own podcast, sounded like a message straight to her. Hewson framed it as valuable guidance about managing family feuds. A polite phrase, but one loaded with implication. Because who in the public eye is more infamous for family feuds than Meghan Markle? This wasn't just reporting. It was interpretation. And that's the danger Meghan didn't anticipate. She thought she was curating a conversation about female empowerment, legacy, and business leadership. Instead, commentators framed it as an intervention. Tina, knowingly or unknowingly, was painted as the wise elder giving Meghan a lesson she desperately needed. And the reaction spread like wildfire. Tabloids ran headlines dripping with irony. Beyoncé's mum schools Meghan on family. Tina Knowles preaches forgiveness. Meghan sits in silence. Social media amplified it with memes. Meghan's frozen smile contrasted with captions like, "When your guest accidentally drags your entire life." TikTok creators clipped the moment and overlaid dramatic music, calling it the most subtle shade of the year. The internet thrives on humiliation, and Meghan had handed it to them on a silver platter. Now here's where the commentators became even more brutal. They didn't stop at highlighting the awkwardness. They drew comparisons. They contrasted Tina's philosophy of apology with Meghan's track record of estrangement. They replayed the Thomas Markle saga, the Samantha Markle feud, the Kate bridesmaid dress fight, the William fallout, the Charles snubs. Every broken bond became Exhibit A in the case against Meghan. And Tina's words became the prosecutor's closing argument. Even neutral commentators couldn't resist the irony. Imagine how it played on breakfast television. Hosts chuckling as they said things like, "Well, Meghan certainly knows a thing or two about family disagreements." The audience laughed, but Meghan's image took yet another beating. And it didn't stop in the UK. American outlets picked it up too. Entertainment programs ran with the Beyoncé connection. Beyoncé's mum gives life lessons on Meghan's podcast became a viral headline. The subtext? Meghan is no Beyoncé, and Tina just reminded everyone of it. In the court of public opinion, Tina was the queen mother of wisdom. Meghan was the awkward student pretending to take notes. Ask yourself, why did this hit so hard? Because the contrast was too sharp to ignore. On one side, Tina Knowles, mother of the most successful entertainer of her generation, preaching humility, reconciliation, and family unity. On the other, Meghan Markle, estranged from nearly everyone outside her immediate household, sitting silently, as if the words weren't aimed right at her chest. And commentators knew this wasn't just gossip fodder. It was symbolic. Tina's words weren't just about one feud. They were about values. They were about legacy. They were about how history remembers you. Beyoncé's family will be remembered as a dynasty of support, strength, and unbreakable bonds. Meghan's? Commentators painted it as a dynasty of division, estrangement, and endless bitterness. The worst part? Meghan had no defense. She couldn't issue a press statement saying, "Actually, Tina wasn't talking about me." That would only make it worse. She couldn't cut off Tina, not without alienating Beyoncé's orbit, a Hollywood circle Meghan desperately wants access to. She couldn't even publicly laugh it off, because the internet had already decided it was shade. Meghan was stuck in the most humiliating position of all, silence. And silence, in the world of royal commentary, is deadly. It means everyone else gets to tell the story for you. It means every pundit, every journalist, every talk show host gets to decide what Tina really meant. Meghan lost control of the narrative, and that's her worst nightmare. But here's where the story sharpens into something even more devastating. Commentators didn't just frame this as advice Meghan refused to take. They framed it as evidence. Evidence of a deeper truth. Meghan will never change. That's the verdict they began pushing. Tina's advice was noble. It was wise. It was heartfelt. And Meghan ignored it. By ignoring it, she confirmed what her critics have always believed, that she is incapable of humility, incapable of apology, incapable of reconciliation.